I never thought my marriage would end up where it did. 3 years ago, when Emma and I tied the knot, I was sure she was the love of my life. She was smart, beautiful, and so full of life that it made me want to be a better man. But sometimes, people aren't who you think they are. Emma and I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Virginia. It wasn't the most exciting place, but we were happy, or so I thought. I worked full-time at a local tech company, while Emma worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office. She liked her job, but hated that she had to rely on me or ride shares to get around. "It's so annoying not being able to do things on my own," she said one day, slamming her phone down after struggling to book an Uber during rush hour. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd always been fine letting me drive her to work, the grocery store, or wherever she needed to go. But that day, she was different, restless. "I think I'm going to get my license," she said suddenly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was surprised but supportive. Emma had grown up in the city, where public transportation was reliable and driving wasn't really necessary. But now that we lived in the suburbs, it made sense. I even thought it might be good for her, something that would boost her confidence and give her more freedom. "That's a great idea," I told her. "I'll help you however I can." She didn't waste any time. That same evening, she downloaded the DMV handbook and started watching videos about driving basics. It was like a switch flipped. She became obsessed with learning the rules of the road. Every night, she'd sit at the dining table, surrounded by flashcards and notes, muttering about stop signs and speed limits. At first, it was kind of funny. She'd quiz me on random driving laws I hadn't thought about since I was a teenager. "If there's no stop sign at an intersection, but someone's on your right, who goes first?" "The person on the right," I answered without hesitation. "Good," she said, scribbling something in her notebook. It felt like a little project we could share, something to bond over. I even joked about how she was turning into a traffic law expert. "You're going to put DMV instructors out of a job," I teased one night. But Emma wasn't laughing. "I have to get this right," she said, her tone unusually serious. She didn't just want to pass the test. She wanted to ace it. She'd stay up late, studying every detail about road signs, lane changes, and right-of-way rules. It was like she was preparing for a career in law enforcement, not just a simple driver's test. Over time, her determination started to feel intense. She stopped doing the little things we used to enjoy together, like cooking dinner or watching TV shows. When I asked if she wanted to go out for a walk or grab ice cream, she'd wave me off, saying, "I need to finish this chapter or I've got to focus on parking techniques." I chalked it up to her being ambitious. Emma always threw herself into new projects with everything she had. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't just about learning to drive. It was about proving something, though I couldn't quite figure out what. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, she said, "Once I get my license, it'll make your life so much easier." I paused, not sure what she meant. "How so?" "Well, you won't have to drive me around anymore," she said, drying a plate. "I can handle my own errands, get to work on my own. It'll take some pressure off you." I smiled. "That's true, but I don't mind driving you." "I know," she said quickly, almost offensively. "But it's not fair to you. I need to be more independent." It sounded reasonable at the time, and I told myself that her determination was just a sign of her wanting to grow. But looking back, I can see now that it wasn't about independence, it was about control. The funny thing is, when I think about that period of our marriage, I remember feeling proud of her. She seemed so motivated and disciplined, like she was trying to make life better for both of us. But underneath all of that, there was something darker brewing, something I didn't see until it was too late. After weeks of studying like her life depended on it, Emma finally enrolled in a driving school. She was so excited you'd think she'd just gotten accepted to law school or something. I remember her waking up extra early that first day, standing in front of the mirror and obsessing over what to wear. She settled on a casual outfit, jeans, a simple top, and sneakers, but it took her nearly an hour to decide. It's just driving school, right?" I teased as I watched her pack her notebook and DMV handbook into her purse. She rolled her eyes. "It's not just driving school. This is a big deal for me." I smiled and kissed her on the forehead. "You're going to do great." And I meant it. At the time, I was genuinely proud of her for taking this step. Emma's first lesson was with an instructor named Greg, a middle-aged guy who'd been teaching for over a decade. When she got back that evening, she couldn't stop talking about him. "He's so patient," she said, practically glowing. "He didn't yell at me once, even when I messed up." "That's good," I said, happy to hear she was off to a good start. Her first few lessons seemed to go smoothly. Every evening after class, she'd come home and give me a detailed play-by-play of her day behind the wheel. "Today, I practiced turning at intersections," she said one night, her eyes lighting up. "It's harder than it looks. I almost forgot a signal once, but Greg reminded me just in time." She was like a little kid learning how to ride a bike, and I loved seeing her so enthusiastic. But as the weeks went on, her stories started to change. She stopped focusing on what she was learning and started venting about how frustrating other drivers were. "People are idiots," she said one evening, tossing her bag onto the couch. "This guy cut me off today, and Greg said I should have slowed down and let him in. Why should I? It's not my fault he doesn't know how to drive." "Welcome to driving," I said with a laugh. "You'll get used to it." But Emma wasn't laughing. "I just don't get it," she muttered. "Why are there so many reckless drivers out there?" Despite her frustrations, Emma kept throwing herself into her lessons. She practiced parking, merging onto highways, and even parallel parking, which she claimed was the hardest thing she'd ever done. "It's like a math equation," she said one night, miming the motions with her hands. "Turn the wheel this way, then that way, and somehow you're supposed to end up perfectly in the spot. How do people do this every day?" I laughed and reminded her that she'd get the hang of it with practice. And she did, at least according to her. She started coming home with stories about how Greg had praised her for improving. "He said I'm one of his best students," she bragged one evening, her face glowing with pride. But there were moments that made me pause. One night, she came home unusually quiet. Normally, she'd walk in the door and immediately start talking about her lesson. But this time, she just sat down at the dining table and stared at her phone. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting my laptop aside. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "I hit a curb while trying to park today. Greg said it's normal, but I don't know. I feel like I'm not good at this." "Everyone makes mistakes," I said, trying to reassure her. "That's why you're taking lessons, to learn and improve." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Over time, I noticed Emma started becoming more secretive about her lessons. In the beginning, she'd share every little detail, but now her answers were short and vague. "How was your lesson?" I asked one evening as we sat down for dinner. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her plate. "Just fine?" She shrugged. "Yeah, same as always." I didn't push her, but it felt strange. I wondered if maybe she was feeling insecure about her progress and didn't want to talk about it. Still, it nagged at me. What really stood out, though, was how much time she was spending at the driving school. Normally, lessons are an hour or two, but Emma would be gone for 3, sometimes 4 hours. When I asked about it, she'd say they were spending extra time practicing on the road. "I just want to be ready for the test," she explained. It made sense, and I didn't question it at the time. But in hindsight, those extra hours didn't add up. Another thing that started to change was her attitude toward me. Emma had always been quick to share her thoughts and feelings, but now she seemed distant. If I asked too many questions about her lessons, she'd snap at me. "Why are you so interested?" she asked one evening, glaring at me from across the table. "I'm just trying to be supportive," I said, taken aback by her tone. "Well, you don't need to micromanage me," she snapped, grabbing her plate and walking into the kitchen. That wasn't like her at all. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just stressed about the upcoming test. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The day of her driving test finally arrived, and Emma was a nervous wreck. She paced around the house all morning, double-checking her paperwork and muttering about all the things that could go wrong. I offered to drive her to the DMV, but she insisted on going alone. "I need to do this by myself," she said. When she came back that afternoon, she was practically glowing. "I passed," she announced, holding up her temporary license with a grin. I hugged her and told her how proud I was. "I knew you could do it," I said. She smiled and kissed me. "This is going to change everything for us. At the time, I thought she meant it in a good way. But looking back, I realize now that those words were a warning. Emma was ecstatic after passing her driving test. For days, it was all she could talk about. She spent hours researching cars, watching videos about road safety, and reading reviews on compact sedans versus SUVs. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself getting caught up in it too. We didn't have the budget to buy a brand new car, so we settled on an older model, a 2013 Toyota Corolla. It was nothing fancy, but it was reliable, had decent mileage, and fit our budget. Emma was thrilled. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand over the hood like she'd just bought a luxury sports car. At first, she was cautious about driving alone. For the first week or so, she only drove short distances, grocery store runs, quick trips to the pharmacy, things like that. She'd text me every time she got somewhere safely, even if it was just 5 minutes down the road. But it didn't take long for her confidence to grow. By the second week, she was venturing farther out, shopping malls, visiting friends, and even taking scenic drives just to practice being on the road. "I'm finally free," she told me one night as we sat on the couch. "I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. It's such an amazing feeling." I smiled, happy for her. But a small part of me couldn't help but feel left out. Before she got her license, we used to run errands together or plan outings as a couple. Now, she was always out on her own, leaving me at home wondering what she was up to. One evening, she came home later than usual. I asked where she'd been, and she said she'd gone to a new boutique downtown that her friend had recommended. "You would have hated it," she said with a laugh. "It was all clothes and jewelry." "Did you buy anything?" I asked. She hesitated for a split second before shaking her head. "No, nothing caught my eye." I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, that hesitation feels significant. Over the next few weeks, Emma's driving habits became erratic. She'd leave the house at odd hours, claiming she wanted to get more comfortable driving in different conditions. Sometimes she'd come back excited, telling me about a new route she'd discovered or a cool coffee shop she'd stumbled upon. Other times, she'd come home quiet and distracted, brushing off my questions with vague answers like, "It was fine," or "nothing special." Her phone also became a constant companion. She was always checking it, even when we were supposed to be spending time together. If I asked who she was texting, she'd say it was her sister or one of her friends. "Why are you so paranoid?" she snapped one night when I commented on how glued she was to her screen. "I'm not paranoid," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I just miss spending time with you." She sighed and put her phone down. "I'm sorry," she said, though it didn't feel sincere. One Saturday, Emma announced that she was going to drive to a nearby city about an hour away to check out a farmer's market. "Do you want to come?" she asked, but her tone made it clear she didn't actually want me to say yes. "I have some work to catch up on," I said, sensing that she'd prefer to go alone. "Okay, I'll be back in a few hours," she said, grabbing her keys and heading out the door. She didn't get back until after dark. When I asked how the market was, she gave me a generic answer about how crowded it was and how she didn't end up buying much. "Did you at least have fun?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, avoiding eye contact. "It was nice to get out of the house." The thing is, Emma wasn't just getting out of the house. She was changing. She became more distant, more defensive, and more secretive. She'd always been a bit of a homebody, but now she seemed to find any excuse to be out on the road. One night, I noticed a small scratch on the front bumper of her car. "What happened here?" I asked, pointing it out. "Oh, that," she said, her voice a little too casual. "I accidentally scraped it against a curb while parking." "It's nothing." "Are you sure that's all it was?" She shot me a look. "Yes, I'm sure. Why do you always have to question me?" Her defensiveness caught me off guard, but I let it go. Maybe she really was just stressed from driving more often. Or maybe I was overthinking things. But the truth was, something about Emma's behavior didn't sit right with me. She was changing in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it felt like she was pulling away from me. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that this was just a phase, and that we'd eventually go back to how things were before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. It all went downhill the day Emma drove into the city and didn't come back the same. She'd been driving regularly for a month by then, and her confidence was through the roof. She was no longer hesitant about long drives, and she'd started venturing into busier areas like downtown Houston, where the roads were packed and stressful. "I need to get used to city driving," she told me that morning as she grabbed her keys. "It's different from the suburbs." "Be careful," I said, giving her a quick kiss before she walked out the door. She flashed me a smile. "I will. Don't wait up. I might take my time." I didn't think much of it. Emma had always been independent, and I figured she just wanted to enjoy her newfound freedom. But something about the way she said, "Don't wait up," stuck with me. Hours passed, and she still hadn't come home. By the time it got dark, I was starting to get worried. I texted her a couple of times, but all I got back was a single message. "Running late, don't worry." It was almost 10 p.m. when she finally walked through the door. Her hair was a mess, and she looked rattled, like she'd just gone through something. "Are you okay?" I asked, standing up from the couch. She nodded quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. It was just a long day." "What happened?" "Nothing," she said, brushing past me and heading straight for the kitchen. I followed her, watching as she poured herself a glass of water with trembling hands. "Emma," I said, my voice firm. "What's going on?" She hesitated for a moment before sighing heavily. "Okay, fine. I got into a little accident." My stomach dropped. "What? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine," she said quickly. "It wasn't serious, just a fender bender. I hit the back of some guy's car at a red light." Relief washed over me. "Okay, as long as you're not hurt. What about the car? Is it bad?" "It's just a small dent," she said, waving it off. "Nothing to worry about." "And the other guy? Did you exchange insurance?" Her eyes flickered for a second, so fast I almost missed it. "Yeah, we exchanged information. I paid him $1,000 to cover the damages, so we wouldn't have to go through insurance." $1,000. I repeated, stunned. "Emma, that's a lot of money. Are you sure that's all it was?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, that's all it was. He was really nice about it." I wanted to believe her, but something didn't sit right. Emma wasn't the type to carry that much cash, and she hadn't mentioned going to the bank. How did she pay him so quickly? Still, I didn't press her. She was clearly shaken, and I didn't want to make her feel worse. "Okay," I said finally. "I'm just glad you're okay. But next time, call me if something like this happens." I could have helped. She nodded, but her mind seemed elsewhere. The next morning, I went outside to check the car. Sure enough, there was a dent on the front bumper, just like she'd said. But there was something else, a faint scrape on the side panel that she hadn't mentioned. I went back inside and brought it up. "Hey, did you notice this scratch on the side of the car?" Emma barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, that must have happened when I hit the other car. It's no big deal." Her dismissive tone irritated me, but I let it go. A few days later, I was cleaning the house when I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Emma's dashcam. She bought it a few months ago when she started driving, saying it was for safety. I'd completely forgotten about it until I saw it sitting in the drawer of our entertainment center. Curiosity got the better of me, and I plugged it into my laptop. The footage started off normal enough. Emma driving through the city, stopping at lights, navigating through traffic. But then it happened. I watched as Emma pulled up to a red light, where the car in front of her braked a little too quickly. She wasn't paying attention and bumped into it. I could hear her swearing under her breath as she got out of the car. The man whose car she had got out, too. He looked to be in his late 30s, tall and well-dressed, with an air of confidence that made me immediately dislike him. They talked for a few minutes, and then things took a turn I hadn't expected. "I can't afford to pay for this," Emma said, her voice shaky. The man crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Well, you hit my car. What are you going to do about it?" There was a long pause before Emma said something that made my blood run cold. Maybe we can work something out." The man raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" Emma leaned in closer, lowering her voice so much that I had to strain to hear. "I can come over to your place," she said. "Tonight." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The rest of the conversation was muffled, but I didn't need to hear the details to understand what had just happened. Emma hadn't paid him $1,000. She'd offered herself to him, and she'd lied to me about it. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could she do this to me? To us? When Emma came home that evening, I confronted her about the footage. She denied it at first, but when I showed her the video, she broke down and started crying. I didn't know what else to do, she sobbed. I panicked. You still here? Disgusted. You had a choice, Emma. You could have called me. You could have taken responsibility like an adult. But instead, you did this. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But her apology meant nothing to me. The moment I showed Emma the dashcam footage, I knew there was no coming back from this. She sat on the couch, crying into her hands, but I couldn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her. You didn't just lie to me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. You sold yourself to get out of paying for a mistake. And then you came home, looked me in the eye, and made me believe everything was fine. She looked up at me, her face red and swollen. I didn't know what else to do, okay? He was threatening to call the cops, and I panicked. I didn't want you to find out and think less of me. Think less of you? I laughed bitterly. Emma, I can't even look at you right now without feeling disgusted. Do you have any idea how much worse this is than just admitting you made a mistake? She started sobbing again, but I wasn't done. And let's talk about the $1,000 you said you paid him, I continued. Did you really think I wouldn't figure out the truth? Did you even care about how much this would hurt me? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. It was just one time. One time. I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. And that makes it okay. You cheated on me, Emma. You betrayed me. How am I supposed to forgive that? She didn't answer. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and kept crying, as if her tears would somehow erase what she'd done. But then something snapped in me. No, I said, my voice cold and firm. You don't get to cry and play the victim here. You made this choice. You're the one who destroyed our marriage, not me. Emma looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Please, Nate, she said, her voice trembling. Don't do this. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. But I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix. You made sure of that. I walked out of the room, my hands shaking with rage. I needed to clear my head to figure out what I was going to do next. But as I stood in the hallway, my eyes landed on the small box of keepsakes we kept by the stairs. It was filled with photos, cards, and little mementos from our relationship, proof of the life we'd built together. And now it all felt meaningless. When I went back into the living room, Emma was still sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with tears. You need to leave, I said, my voice flat. Her head snapped up. What? No, Nate, please. Get out, I said, cutting her off. Pack your things and go. I can't do this anymore. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she started to plead. Nate, please don't do this, she said, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, but I love you. I'll do anything to make it up to you. Just give me another chance. I shook my head. You had your chance, Emma, and you threw it away the moment you decided to lie to me and betray me. I deserve better than this. Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, I said, my voice cold. Call your sister. Stay at a hotel. Figure it out. But you're not staying here. She tried to argue, but I didn't want to hear it. I walked out of the room and shut the door behind me, leaving her to pack her things. It took her about an hour to gather her stuff. When she finally left, she didn't say a word. She just grabbed her bags, walked out the door, and drove off in the same car that had started this whole mess. When the house was finally quiet, I sat down on the couch and stared at the empty space where she'd been. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. The next day, I called a lawyer to start the divorce process. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Emma had shown me who she really was, and I couldn't spend the rest of my life with someone who would betray me so easily. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't losing Emma. It was losing the version of her I thought I knew. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have done this. But the woman she'd become? She wasn't someone I could trust. I don't know what Emma's doing now, and honestly, I don't care. All I know is that I'm better off without her.